everyone to this session on renewable energy generation, where we're looking at the techno economics of this very important topic. The topic we have here is essentially the fundamental element towards decarbonization, and one that has seen an incredible growth story. In this panel, I will start off with a quick overview by setting the context, further elaborating what Professor Jhunjhunwala and Dr. Milind just presented. And then we will start with a free-flowing discussion where the panelists will also share some of their thoughts and insights in this topic. But sort of just jumping in, and this is again, just if somebody could show the screen. I'm again repeating that this is just elaborating what Professor Jhunjhunwala and Dr. Milind just mentioned, the rise of renewables. Just straight away getting into the headline of the story. Today, renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy available anywhere in the world. And to double down on that fact, renewable energy in the form of solar in India is the cheapest form of energy available anywhere in the world. The point that I'm trying to make is that renewables is no more a tomorrow's choice. We're in the here and now of renewables being the foundational aspect of all of energy generation, requirement, consumption for today and tomorrow. And this is obviously showcased in this presentation, in the visual that you can see here, with the unprecedented decline in the costs, making it really cheaper than anything else today that we have for energy generation in terms of new power generation. We've reached a stage where we're starting to define the energy transition. And this is so by what I am saying and portraying here as the trifecta of factors. The first one being cost. Renewable electricity is the cheapest electricity source in 90% of the world today. The second one being security or self-reliance. I'll be showing in my next slide that 90% of people live in countries with an abundance of renewable energy. And the third one, of course, all of us here know that renewables have an ecological footprint 100 times lower than fossil fuels. Re-emphasizing the point that the renewables era is in the here and the now. But, the ever familiar question comes up, is there enough renewable energy to meet all of the demand? And in this visual we have up here, I'm just showing you solar and wind energy potential as a multiple of energy demand. And as you can see, 90% of the world have enough and more solar energy to meet not only today's demand, but in countries like India, it is enough to meet 10 times our current consumption. And this is only as per current technology. With some of my friends in IIT Madras and colleagues, we also did some analysis of what India would require. And the picture looked like Haryana. We would need to completely cover Haryana with solar panels to meet all of India's energy demand. Now, that leaves us with a very simple question. What's stopping us from turning fully solar or turning fully renewables? And that is what we precisely look at today in this panel. And I'm honored and privileged to have such an esteemed guest of panelists here with me today to sort of talk about some of the challenges, opportunities, and what lies ahead in the future of the renewable energy scenario in India and the world. I'd like to start off or kick off this discussion with just asking each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves along with the work they and their team is driving. But along with that, I'd also like to pose a question just as a part of the introduction. What, according to each of you, about the meteoric rise in renewables took you by surprise? Each of you have been industry veterans in the sector. Sort of relaying the question again, what about the incredible growth in solar over the last decade and more has taken you by surprise? Were there any key moments or turning points that you can reflect upon as something that is worth sharing to the audience here? But if you could have Sujoy start, just to introduce yourself and try and answer the question that I just posed.
Thanks, Anson, for having us in this session, in this festival. Just by way of introduction, I lead First Solar's India business. First Solar is one of the world's largest manufacturer of solar modules. We are part of the Solar Module Super League, and in fact, the only company in the Western Hemisphere to be in that league as of now. We make thin film photovoltaics, so it's very, very different from the silicon value chain, which Milind explained in the previous talk. Our technology uses an alternate semiconductor called cadmium telluride, and we make these panels by depositing a very thin layer of semiconductor and sandwich between two pieces of glass. The company's been around for the last 2 decades. We listed on NASDAQ. It's a public listed company, and of late we've invested into establishing a fully integrated 3.3 gigawatt thin film PV module manufacturing in Sriperumbudur. The factory is coming up, and we will be starting commercial production next year with a couple of unique things. Number one, we'll have zero dependencies on the China supply chain because we don't use we don't depend on the silicon dependencies for our technology. The other thing is we would be introducing as part of our manufacturing, at least for India, one of its first kind of high value end-of-life recycling facility for solar modules. This will be a classic example of collaboration and cooperation between the US and India, two equally large countries outside of China for whom renewables in general, net zero, all these ambitions are there. And I think this is a great template for collaboration and cooperation to happen between the two largest, the oldest and the largest democracies in the world in terms of sustainable energy, and we hope to, walk our talk literally by October of next year as we come to India. The question you had around what took us by surprise on this growth of renewables, I don't think, at least being an industry participant, we were always sure of the fact that solar energy is going to grow. The pace of decline of costs, which predominantly was driven by significant investments, state-sponsored investments in creating those economies of scale. Somewhere I thought, and some of it is playing out right now as you speak, too much of concentration of supply chain in one country does create monopolies and does create an unfair advantage for a particular country which can start dominating. And that's what we've seen played out in the oil industry, and then that's what we saw play out in the solar industry. So I think for us, the surprise was when the bubble is going to burst. And I think that bubble burst during COVID as countries started to realize that depending on China for the next strategic energy resource, which is solar, yes, the fuel is free, but the technology all comes from one country, it's not a good place to be in. And we've seen countries respond very differently to this, where India has come up with ring fencing of imports and then creating certain local incentives around the Atmanirbhar Bharat to incentivize local manufacturing. Now we see US playing out with the IRA, where $360 billion of subsidies are being committed for clean tech, storage, semiconductor. I think the same situation is playing out in the semiconductor manufacturing also, right? And so I think for us, the surprise was, when would countries wake up to realize that they are beholden to China for all things necessary to lead a sustainable energy future? And to me, that's the wow moment as what we are living through, and hopefully, things become a bit more equal in the world around the supply chain.
Great, thank you, Sujoy. Over to Ramakrishnan GK, if you'd like to share your thoughts on, again, the work that you're leading and any aha moments.
Yeah, first and foremost, it's a privilege to be here, and it takes me back to my own college days at J.N. Tata Auditorium in Indian Institute of Science, where we used to have these kind of gatherings during my graduation and that period. Nice to see the academia and the industry fraternity together. Thanks to Professor and the ISA team for that. I have been into the renewable industry for almost 20 years now. Starting from the days wherein we had home lighting systems, lanterns, solar PV modules being sold at dollar plus or almost $2 per watt kind of tariff, to moving now to 20 cents, 22 cents, depending upon how the supply chain, the way things are. Having seen that, let us look at this period of 2010 onwards, wherein the National Solar Mission happened in India. And at the same time, globally, if you could see, Germany was initially the leader into the solar market. There were two different programs actually happening in the European world, which was from the German model, which was typically the rooftop or the small projects, and then the Spanish and the models from south of Europe, which were typically the large solar parks. So India had actually followed a dual policy, wherein on one side they were promoting the rooftop or the decentralized distributed generation, as they call it, point of consumption, point of generation being as close to each other as possible to reduce the T&D losses. And on the other side, the large land parcels which were available, trying to use that as much as possible and then move to the point of inflection. So today we have in India a very good scale, like 100 gigawatt plus of renewable installations. Tamil Nadu being the state which is the leader, where you have from the wind side, if you look at it, 9 gigawatts plus of installations on wind and 4 gigawatt plus of solar, and large policies coming up. In many states, all policies are there. Seki, if you look at it, almost like 12 to 15 gigawatts of tenders are in various stages of finalization, or PPAs have been awarded, or in that kind of a process. So India is actually moving in a big way into that particular direction, yes. Now, what happens to the countries and the states and the grids when you have so much of renewables moving in? There is a point of intermittency. When you look at it, the initial level is very good. When you have, say, 20%, 25% of RE penetration into the grid, it looks good. It looks really rosy, that everything is fine. But the moment we see that we move from 40% onwards, now states like Karnataka, states like Tamil Nadu, there are days wherein you find that you have more than 60%, 80% of renewables which is into the grid. There you find the requirement of peakers, balancers, storage solutions, or some things to do the grid support. And that is something what we at Wärtsilä, the company which I represent here today, are doing it. Wärtsilä as an organization has been there for almost 187 years now. Granddaddy when it comes to engines as a business. Now your question would be that what is an engine manufacturing company doing here talking about renewables and this? See, what we feel and what we are trying to promote this as a solution to the world is, when you go for 100% renewables, there is a transition, there is a path before you reach the Holy Grail. And into that path comes something called peakers and balancers, because it's not always that the storage as a solution can come to you for support of the grid. When you talk about it at smaller scales, 1 hour kind of storage, 2 hour kind of storage, yes, battery-based energy storage solutions, which we also provide, it's available. 4 hours kind of storage is something which is the upper end of lithium, because after that, commercially, it doesn't become much viable when you have large duration storage requirements. But at the same time, yes, when you talk about 10 hours, 15 hours kind of storage, yes, pumped hydro comes into a big way. But the challenges with pumped hydro or those kind of solutions is that one is it's dependent upon the rainfall or the water availability. Water becomes a challenge when if it is a drought kind of season. Are you using that water for drinking or for agriculture and other purposes, or would you be using it for pumped hydro? I mean, there will be a fight for water from that point of view. That's number one. Second thing is, those are centralized storages which can support the grid at the transmission voltage level. But when it comes to discoms and distribution kind of levels, or the cities, or to support the cities and other things, and there is a duration limitation. Like if you talk about a 10-hour storage or a 20-hour storage, yes, what happens if like last 4 days we had continuous monsoon and there was not much wind either, so we don't have any other alternative. So in that case, you have got a solution, or we have got sets of solutions through which, yes, I mean, this comes as speakers and balancers. Today, you would find that these speakers and balancers are operating with, say, fossil fuel, because that is what is available. But definitely, yes, as the world is moving towards power to X to power, that is, this excess power is being converted into green hydrogen, ammonia, biomethane is being produced on the other side, and other synthetic fuels which are coming in. So these solutions are operational, or they are capable to operate, and when those kind of fuels are available, these solutions would be ready to operate on those, getting us into the transition for 100% of renewables. I mean, that is something which we are looking at, and that is where a lot of research and activities are going on onto that. And as you rightly said, yes, the point of inflection, if you look at it, is typically the way the scaling of the industry in solar has happened. That has not happened into the wind industry. I mean, if you look at it, the cost of wind power has not moved much. But on the other side, solar power, which was initially at the JNNSM starting, selling at 18 rupees 60 paisa, 18 rupees 40 paisa per unit. Tamil Nadu was the first state wherein, under the JNNSM rules way back in 2010, the tariff was 1840. Gujarat was 1540 or so. That was the kind of tariff which was available. Today we are talking about sub 3 rupees kind of tariff. So the point of inflection has been the scale of deployment of these kind of projects, the kind of value additions, value chains which have created. And now that, yes, Make in India policies and the way we are looking at it, companies like Reliance, which is setting up their gigafactories over here, First Solar is setting up their gigafactories. Some of these solutions definitely, as once we get into the ingots or the silicon to be manufactured in India itself, we might be saying that we will become self-sufficient from that perspective itself. So that is something which looks to be.
Great. I think you've touched upon a lot of the aspects that I want to cover over the panel, but want to give Siv Ramakrishnan a chance to, again, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about any of the turning points as per your experience in the sector.
Thank you, Anson. At the outset, let me thank you for giving us a slot in this meeting. Actually, I'm myself Shivaramushan. I'm associated with the state nodal agency ANERT. For those who are not familiar with ANERT, that is the SNA of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy in the state of Kerala. And I am working there as a resource person. My job profile covers demand aggregation, basically policy and advisory role to the SNA, which is a organ of the Ministry of Power under Government of Kerala. So that's all about me and our organization. And you also wanted to add about what surprise or what could be the surprise. In fact, as an implementing agency, we are not at all surprised about the growth. In fact, we are dissatisfied, because you will have surprise only when something comes new. The solar growth or renewable growth was very well defined and planned 1 decade ago. We started off with 20 gigawatt target in solar, and then we enhanced it 5 times in 2015. So we are still worried. Another 2 months to go. Will we touch the tape at the end of the year? It's a big question. So maybe the manufacturing community or the developer community are happy and satisfied, but implementing agencies are not satisfied because we are far away from the tape. We know that very well. But anyway, that is on the question part. But let me begin my comments or discussion with on a positive note, because this is a year, 2022 was a year which saw the maximum number of policy or regulations or amendments, notifications, whatever name you call, it has come in support of the renewable industry in India. It includes the most significant of them, as all the manufacturers will agree, the PLI scheme for the manufacturers. It has been enhanced substantially to attract investment in the sector and also to produce more make in India modules. So that is all on the positive side. There are also certain difficulties associated with. I would also like to point out the difficulties, why it is not good, coming up to the expectation, because the takeaway from this forum can include that also. We have an ambitious, very attractive, or rather this has attracted the attention of so many manufacturers from other countries also. That is the ALMM, the approved list of makes and manufacturers, models and manufacturers, which was introduced in the countries, and also the insistence of domestic content requirement in the government programs. So these two were supposed to have taken the chart up, but look really what has happened. If Milinji, Jo, whatever chart you have shown, all pertains to last decade. This decade has shown, okay, we will remove the top 2 years on account of our pandemic situation. But really, did the energy cost or the plant cost, installation cost have really gone down despite all these efforts? If you do the fact check, the answer is no. The energy graph Milinji has shown stops at 2019. It is not for 2022 or 23. The current level of energy prices have shown sharp increase. It has taken a reverse. So it is not so rosy a picture. If you look at the installation cost also, the benchmark prices of ministry has also undergone many revisions, considering the price constraints. When you enforced the DCR requirement, naturally the prices of the solar modules have gone up by almost 50%, which was 20 rupees, it is now almost 30 rupees. So whatever technological advancements you have made, two things had offset this. One is the cost of module, the second is the cost of land. The land prices were also rigged to meet this solar. So these two are very significant factors, and which we need to now really have a relook at the ALMM. That is our, it's not my organization's view, it is my personal view. Because ALMM has also created barriers for the growth, which needs to be reviewed, and also the DCR content. Recently, I think from October 1 onwards, the DCR content was to be there for all net metering projects or open access projects, but because of pressure, because we know that it is not going to materialize. It is a very nice philosophy that you need to have indigenous manufacturing, create an environment for growth for the industry. But look at the targets; the gap is widening. So we need to really have a relook on that ALMM aspect as well. So we need actually the magic price. Every discussion, every presentation we hear is the 2 rupees 44 paisa per kilowatt hour REWA price. that doesn't. I don't know whether that project has really kicked off. If you really look at the statistics, that is another worrying point. Look at the statistics. What India currently has 60 gigawatt of solar power. How many of them are functional? How much of energy is going to the grid? Is it proportional? Is it commensurating the capacity installed? So these really will give you shocks. We need to learn from that before we take further steps for our 500 gigawatt target. I take a pause here. We'll come back.
Right, thank you. You've touched upon some very valid points, and I hope the gathering here, brings together the best minds to solve some of the challenges that you raised, because I certainly believe these are solvable problems. If we could get to the stage that we are at today, then there's certainly minds here that could help solve some of the challenges that you raised. But thank you for raising them. Over to you, Sir Bhaskar Pandian. If you'd like to just quickly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you're driving.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Anson. And it's our great pleasure to be part of the EnVision, which is India's first energy festival, actually. So we are very privileged for that. And about myself, I do have little more than 2 decades of experience in managing the technology and operations across several organizations, actually. And currently, I'm associated with Vikram Solar Limited. So that is one of the largest solar module manufacturer in India. We started our operations in 2012 with a 10 megawatt level, actually. It's a very small number at that time. But today we are at around 2.5 gigawatt capacity. And we do have further plans to increase the capacity to around 8 gigawatt levels in the coming years. So that's what our plan. And Vikram Solar is one of the top 5 EPC players in India by the installed base. And we have been consistently performing best at the PVEL, the Photovoltaic Evolution Laboratory top ranking. We ranked 5 times in the last 6 years. So that's our record holding about our company. And I directly come to your question now. So the turning points for the success in India solar sector, actually. So when we are discussing about this point, it's worth mentioning about the reforms have been undertaken in this sector, actually, by the government of India. I think the national solar mission is the key trigger for the entire stuff, actually, in the last 10 years. So if you look at the capacity installation for solar by 2009 or 10, it's a very small number. It's only 10 megawatt, and today we are at around 60 gigawatt level, actually. And our government has set a target to reach around 500 gigawatt RE capacity, and of which 280 gigawatt is going to be the solar capacity by 2030, actually. And today we are at 60 gigawatt, actually. So that means if you do the simple math, then every year we got to add nearly about 28 to 30 gigawatt every year we got to add to reach that capacity. So government now to increase to minimize the deficit and also to boost the local manufacturing, domestic manufacturing. So they have been bringing in a lot of policy measures, like sir mentioned about the production linked incentive scheme, which is called PLI. Tranche 2, there has been a recent announcement on the Tranche 2. Then approved list of model manufacturers, which is called ALMM. Then basic custom duties, BCD. Like these are some of the policy measures government has been actively bringing in to boost the domestic manufacturing. And also then we have the target for the net zero target, net emission target, which we got to reach by around 2070. So that's what signed. Then our renewable energy target also has been increased from 450 to 500 gigawatt, actually. So looking at the big summary, I would relate to the national solar mission target, JNNM, which was mentioned by sir, actually. That's the key trigger for the strong growth in the solar sector. But still a lot of gaps, like our capacity is still limited. We are not able to meet our demand, the domestic demand. And those things we will discuss in the further discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Milind sir. If you'd like to, as a veteran in the industry, when you look back, were there any surprises to you? Any moments that you felt turned the tide towards our favor as we look at, how much solar and the entire renewable capacity has grown?
Yeah, there is a crosstalk. I think one of us. Okay. Thank you, Anson. Yeah, you are correct, actually. I look like a veteran. I have the grayest hair, actually, among all of us. Mr. Ramakrishnan, you are second. Okay, so if you ask me, what surprised me, actually, and what sticks in my mind regarding changes in solar energy. As far as the technology and operations journey is concerned, quite frankly, nothing. Simply because I came from the semiconductor background. We really actually saw when polysilicon was selling at more than $100 per kg, it could be produced at less than $10 per kg. Same thing is true for actually crystals. And we had, now I can actually tell you this because the old company doesn't exist in the same form anymore. When modules were actually selling at more than $2, $3 per watt, we had a clear path to 50 cents. And our own internal models actually had showed 30 cents with heterojunction. I'm talking about 2010. See, beyond a critical mass, everybody is equally intelligent. Let us just accept it. It is just that we don't actually use our experiences properly, and we don't believe in our own vision and projections many times. There was a big debate. Obviously, actually, First Solar is a great success story with thin films. But we knew that actually there was a lot of debate in the beginning as far as a thin film versus silicon is concerned, what is going to be dominant. We knew it was going to be silicon. Between multi and mono, there was even bigger debate. It was very clear to us that it was going to be mono as back as actually 2011 and 2012. So if we invested actually heavily into mono technology. So nothing really actually surprises me, but I do agree with Sujoy, if I have to actually pick something, how world has woken up to the need for domestic production. That is in light of actually what you just mentioned, Mr. Ramakrishnan, that module prices have gone up. There is nothing fundamental in technology or any technical deficiency that is actually causing this. It is simply increase in the polysilicon prices because of the supply-demand gap. Polysilicon was selling at around $8 to $10 per kg. That should be its steady-state price for single crystal growth. It had touched $40 per kg. So polysilicon's contribution to module cost actually had touched around 8 to 10 cents, from around 2 to 3 cents. But these are temporary fluctuations. Polysilicon prices are going to come down. And this is what we call as a boom-bust cycle in growth economy. Because when growth is very strong, you cannot actually match capacity to the growth. So there is going to be sometimes oversupply, there is going to be sometimes undersupply. You can put up a module plant very fast, but it takes actually a long period of time to put up a polysilicon plant. There is a lot of capex involved because of the scale involved. So this time period is approximately around 2 to 3 years. So there are boom and bust cycles. But while actually you see these fluctuations, average is coming down. So we have to separate noise from the signal. So from that point of view, controlling supply chain becomes extremely important. Energy is strategic. It is not just economical consideration, right? And that is what all countries have actually woken up to, not just India. You know, actually, what is the level of subsidy in America today? If you do the calculation, at cell level, it is 17 cents per watt. I just showed you in a low-cost country, cost of making modules is 16 cents, cash cost. Subsidy in USA is 17 cents. So it is not just India, actually. All major countries are waking up to this. And it is very, very important to have multiple actually choices. So that is a very big change. See, with oil, there isn't actually much any country can do because oil is where it is, right? But as far as sun is concerned, sun is everywhere. So most definitely, actually, government policy can take advantage of this. And quite frankly, that is a welcome change. In fact, I should tell you today, I'm less frustrated compared to before. I was hoping that India would move into this long time ago. As Vice President of Business Development, who was responsible for providing turnkey solutions, I had actually met quite a few big industrial houses many, many years ago. But it was very difficult to actually sell these technologies in India. I mean, quite frankly, this is where policy making becomes important. Although for companies like Reliance's and Adani's, PLI is not so important, but for entire ecosystem, it becomes extremely important. And that is a very welcome change. Otherwise, I'm not surprised at all. And we have to start believing in ourselves. That is exactly what I want to say. And sorry, maybe it is a little bit of digression. For us to be successful in this sector, we cannot take a stationary view. Most of the Indian companies, in spite of having very strong R&D in some cases, really have license it and install it mentality. In silicon sector, roadmap is extremely important. Roadmap is the king. You saw the curve. If you do not execute on the roadmap, you will not be competitive. You will go out of business because your competition is executing on the roadmap. And to execute that roadmap, even in the short period of time, sometimes core competencies required are the same competencies required for long-term research. So when you talk about R&D in chemical industry or traditional industries, that is very different and relatively far removed from manufacturing compared to silicon industry. That cultural change needs to happen.
Right.
And I see that this research park is already actually doing it.
Yes.
So we should not actually view short-term R&D, mid-term R&D, and long-term R&D in terms of core competencies as different R&Ds. Only the time horizon is different. And that is why most of these R&Ds will have to be co-located with manufacturing to deliver on 3-month roadmap, 6-month roadmap.
Sure.
Quite often, even on a daily and weekly basis, some of the problem solving requires deep core competencies in silicon sector simply because margin for error is small. When you make bulk chemicals, obviously these reactors are gigantic reactors, they run forever. When you grow crystals, these crystal pullers are around 24, 25 meters high. The defects that evolve are literally actually tens of nanometers to few hundreds of nanometers. Interface is of order of actually few millimeters. Temperature field and flow fields are actually controlled by macro phenomena. So you really have to do multi-scale, multi-physics manufacturing. The level of skill set required is so high, there isn't actually any serious boundary between R&D and manufacturing, or I should say it is porous.
Right. So
This mindset change needs to happen. I just want to actually point it out.
Sure. Thank you. I mean, I think these are very valid points, but just in the interest of time, I want to jump into one of the points that Ramakrishnan mentioned, and this is quite often portrayed as one of the biggest limitations of renewables is its intermittency, or the lack of flexibility, and matching demand and supply has been one of the biggest problems that has been portrayed as what is limiting renewable energy growth. So Ramakrishnan, can you, in your experience with the work that you do, share with us some of the learnings that you've seen over your time at Wärtsilä in terms of what the biggest problems are and how you see solutions to these challenges that we're facing with intermittency?
Yeah, sure. In fact, when we do a kind of modeling, which is a part of our market development activities for different parts of the globe, the different grids across the world, we see that yes, with the influx of renewables as it moves, progresses from a different level, there is a requirement for this speaker and balancer which becomes more pronounced in certain grids compared to others. Now, in fact, if you can just help me with that. Yes, on the screen now you can see there is this World Renewable Energy Atlas, which we have tried to create for different locations across the world, or the different grids across the world. Now, I'll just take 1 minute of yours to explain this over here a little more. Like model the different parts of the grid. Say for Central Indian grid, I mean today India is a one nation, one grid, but when it was actually created at that time, we had tried to divide India into 4 different grids. So the Central Indian grid at a period 2050 or so, when we will become 100% renewable, this is what we see as the kind of share of renewable energy and how this grid is going to be. For an average day, the typical dispatch curve would be something like this, wherein you would find this yellow being the solar and the rest of the things over there. So typical quantum for, I mean the same thing if you look at it for south grid. I mean it changes from season to season, and what we are trying to put across here is there is always a requirement for some amount of balancing of the grid. When the grid becomes 100% renewable, or when it reaches above 90%, 80% kind of renewables, so that all these intermittencies have to be absorbed. Now, how do you actually look at these intermittencies and how do you try to absorb it? As I mentioned in the beginning itself, I mean, yes, storage can support us to some extent. depending upon the seasonality, depending upon the duration for which we are looking at. But when we are looking at multi-day kind of a storage and situation, then we are forced to look at the balancer kind of a solution which goes in initially, as I said, with fossil fuel, because green fuels are not available to that quantum. But definitely, yes, at a smaller scale, greens are also available, like biodiesel is available. So you can store the biodiesel for next 1 week, 2 weeks of requirements of the power plant, which is there, the engine-based power plant. And the advantage of these balancers, typically the kind of technologies which people are looking for is something that from 0 to 1 minute or 0 to 2 minutes, this power should be available. And the moment you have enough power into the grid, this thing should cut off from the grid, which is currently not possible with the existing technologies of thermal. I mean, the coal, you know, it takes 4 hours to 6 hours of startup time and at least 1 hour for it to change from one set point to the other. I mean, there are certain kinds of inertia or the thermal lags, as we call it, into the system. Whereas when we look at balancer kind of applications which are required, yes. Now also comes this, when you remove the conventional, the traditional solutions, which are the thermal assets, typically the coal turbines or the steam turbines and the gas turbines, spinning reserve goes out of the grid. So what happens suddenly, because when we talk about all inverter-based power generation, especially the solar inverters, the wind converters and all, suddenly if there is a block load onto the grid, then the grid can collapse because there is no inertia available. So how do you bring that inertia? That inertia typically comes from the kind of what you call a split-second storage, or typically like those, what you call the primary reserves into the grid. I mean, the grid, if you look at it, the grid authorities, they have defined it as primary reserve, secondary reserve, tertiary reserve. So the primary reserve can typically be battery-based solutions, but when it goes to secondary, beyond secondary, I mean, especially for the tertiary, then you require the support of other solutions. So all these things put together, yes, that's how we need to look at grid in totality when we talk about 100% renewables.
I think you've touched upon the points that I was looking for. And that raises the next question that I wanted to ask, is that with the influx of renewables, is India's grid ready today to manage the shift in energy generation? And I know there's a lot of learnings that we've seen over the last decade or so, but with the estimated amount of renewables expected to grow even more rapidly, I'd like to pose the question, and maybe Sujoy can start off by commenting on it, in terms of, is the grid ready, and what is going to be the price of having such a high share of renewables if we don't have a grid that is ready to manage it?
So I think today's grid is ready for today's capacity, right? Typically, grid planning is a relatively longer term activity. And, the current planning process we have is still tuned to the 90s and the 2000s, when a power plant would take about 5 to 7 years from concept to commissioning, as opposed to today's solar plants coming up in 18 months, right? So capacity is coming up much faster. Our view is there is a certain policy tilt which we see towards very large solar plants. So if by going by your example, if everything was to be done in Haryana or say Rajasthan or Kutch, there could be a big problem in terms of grid faults, which will, kick in the LVRT on the inverters. And then you have an issue where if you don't have enough other forms of generation in that localized grid, you could have a grid blackout, which happens. And I think the advantage of solar is that it's very scalable. But from a policy point of view, we are not utilizing that. We are still trying to, yes, we all understand energy has to be affordable, but while all other forms of energy are growing up, the policy tilt is solar has to be stagnated at 244, right? Based on, whatever, as an example, right? I mean, everybody wants that solar tariffs cannot rise, despite whatever comes, right? Petrol prices can go up, right? Coal tariffs can go up because fuel is a pass-through, dollar rate goes up, but solar has to come down. It cannot breach 244 because that was the lowest discovered tariff, right? And my point is, if we just are fixated from a policy standpoint on 244, every plant has to come up in Rajasthan, and then you will have a huge problem on the grid, right? there is an incremental price you pay to, let's say, move solar into more. We could plan for 20 megawatt, 30 megawatt, 50 megawatt, divisional level, district level plants, feeding into the lower part of the grid. And without investing into, pretty expensive liquid fuel peakers, which I'm sure, yes, there is a business case for it, but how will you finance those projects? Is there capital available? Is still very questionable. We could, live with what we have and maximize it before we start looking at other forms of grid support, right, which are not cheap today. So I think right now everything seems to be going into Gujarat, Rajasthan, MP, big solar farms. Nobody's thinking about, because the grid is not designed for digital generation. It's still designed, the relay settings, the trip settings are all designed for rotating equipment, and those will continue. So in areas where there is enough rotating capacity, you will not see these problems. But you look at Rajasthan, you look at Kutch, good luck if we're going to have 20 gigawatts in one district. So to me, that is something which we need to think through, and maybe through IIT Madras, do a research on what's the current state of the grid, and then look at the deployment of solar, because that's the only resource which you can, geographically have a geographical diversity at a relatively low cost. Yes, the tariff might be 10 paisa higher or 20 paisa higher, but the cost of grid blackout in Rajasthan could wipe out that 20 paisa difference. That's my 2 cents on it.
Absolutely, and that is precisely what I wanted to highlight, and really is begging the next question. But maybe before that,
I'll just take one small thing here. Being here in Chennai, let us just understand the Tamil Nadu grid. For 1 second, let us just think about the Tamil Nadu grid and what all has been done to reduce the curtailment of wind power, which is practically generated from the Muppandal or this Ramnad belt, and with the power which is consumed here in Chennai. In fact, they have already done this activity of going ahead with green corridor, strengthening of this green corridor. So all the large solar plants which are available, the extensive wind farms which are available, they are able to bring that bulk of power. And a good study has been done jointly by Tangentco, the NCES, the CVET, and these organizations together with respect to predictability, how exactly the grid balancing has to be done. Maybe some kind of research projects can be, taking that as a cue, something can definitely be looked at. And also Tamil Nadu as a state, I mean, the beauty of solar has been decentralized distributed generation, as we always say. So state has actually looked at a 20 gigawatt kind of a solar park program. The way Karnataka is moving ahead with the next phase of Pavgada and other things, or Gujarat is coming out with 15 gigawatt at the Kutch area, or the Leh Ladakh area where the government has been talking about 13, 14 gigawatts. So end of the day, the idea is wherever you are able to find a mix or combination of good radiation and land parcels available, evacuation processes have already started. The grids have already started going into that particular direction. The national grid has been already the PGCILs and others have already been looking at it. Now, there are a lot of areas where research can be done to see how the grid strengthening can be done to see that this bulk of solar or the wind or the combination of that can be transmitted within the existing system. And along with that, whatever be the other solutions required for balancing, it could be like pumped hydro sitting in, say, Madhya Pradesh or somewhere else, which can support or complement it. And the same way, other kind of solutions also. So that's how the country is looking at it to handle this problem. And various solutions are available, plus various research avenues are available for that.
that really begs this next question that I wanted to pose, in that we've seen the prices decline to such an extent, and that is largely coming from large-scale deployments. But the inherent advantage of renewable energy was also the fact that it can be distributed. I'd like to pose the question here that what do you see as the future of distributed solar or RE generation in the country, which has not taken off as much as the large-scale systems have?
Well, distributed actually generation has to be part of the mix. You will see in India in next 5 years, I'm not even actually talking about very long term, some major actually factories running on distributed actually power generation. Obviously, some support from grid is required, but essentially round the clock power will be available even to run very, very big factories. That is where at least actually Indian industry is headed. So I cannot mention names, but you can think of actually big industrial houses in India. Plan is to actually go in that direction. And that is why it becomes extremely important for us to have a comprehensive solution. And that is what this festival is doing. There has to be actually right solar solution, manufacturing, right energy storage, and it cannot be just battery. Most definitely actually battery cost is coming down, performance is improving. Please do not underestimate what green hydrogen can do. Green hydrogen actually cost is going to come down along with the cost of solar energy. It will reach actually $1 or less in a short period of time. So it becomes extremely important to actually come up with different actually storage solutions. And most definitely maybe some minor balancing is required in spite of all these efforts. But I can actually see the distributed energy generation picking up. And hopefully along the same lines, I think residential rooftop also picks up. But exactly at what rate it will happen is very difficult to project. But at least major industrial houses, I can actually foresee doing this. Quite frankly, it happened long time ago in wind. I mean, if you know the history of what late Mr. Tanti did, the reason actually Suzlon was actually set up in the beginning was essentially to leverage lower actually cost of actually energy production by wind source. So if we are intelligent, most definitely there are solutions available, but with the present state of technology, distributed generation even to run actually major factories is there because it makes economic sense. Okay, I mean, with the cost, even many industries are actually paying around 8 to 11 cents actually per kilowatt hour. You know, if round the clock power is available at around $4.50, around actually 5 to 6 cents, it just makes economic sense. Sorry, one more thing. This is why it becomes extremely important. You know, we keep looking for government to actually provide us subsidies, etc. It is extremely important. But if industries start thinking about, okay, directly we do not have to compete with China. It is not possible without economies of scale. It is catch-22. But what are the cash flows we are facing right now? What is our cost of energy? Our competition can be ourselves right now. Then it allows us to actually build scale. It allows us to build maturity. So everything I'm saying, because I come from the industry, although I have technical background, is driven by economics. So distributed generation is an economic need for industry to remain competitive. If one actually company does it, other company will be forced to do it just to actually be competitive.
Right, thank you, sir. And I wanted to ask, pose the question, same question. So Ramakrishnan, I know Kerala has done a lot in the distributed space. If you could talk briefly about your...
Here on the... okay. I think India currently follows a tariff policy which is technology free. You don't know whether it is nuclear or hydro. You are paying the same tariff. Introduce a variable tariff system where it is dependent on the source. That is one of the solutions. Now that India is moving ahead with a lot of RTC projects, we have a round-the-clock project. Storage is having a predominant role. Naturally, maybe wind and solar has come to a parity, but storage is still far away. So, if we introduce a TOD-based tariff for such projects, it will give a boost. So, these are the two solutions. You know, which comes to my mind immediately. And on the distributed side, particularly on the rooftops, I think it is not going to happen in any time in the near future because we are not even closer to the 10% figure of our. And now adding to the woe, we have now the direct beneficiary transfer system, which according to me may further damage it because it being a low entry barrier area, there are a lot of unscrupulous players entering into this area by just pledging 2.5 rupees, lakh rupees of bank guarantees. Because we are seeing the quality of the people who are applying without any proper background. It's one of the, sitting on the other side, I should not say that, but this is going to pull the system of rooftop penetration backwards. So distributed energy system, if it needs to further grow, which in the desired path, we need to just put a control over the, probably MNRE has released a draft of quality policy to monitor that. But the effectiveness of that, efficacy of that, it is doubtful. We have experienced it. So these are the points I would like to add on.
Right. Thank you. I wanted to just jump quickly to an important conversation that India is starting to sort of take a little bit more seriously now, and that's around manufacturing in India. Can India really be powered by systems that are built in India? And maybe this is something that I'd like to pose to Bhaskara Pandian in terms of what Vikram Solar has in mind when it comes to manufacturing in India, and just sort of maybe touch upon what are your views in terms of manufacturing as a whole when it comes to the Indian market.
Okay, yeah, that's right. So the direct answer for your question is yes. So we can power India through equipment and systems made in India actually. Currently, actually, our overall demand has to be, that's what this morning I mentioned, it's roughly about 40 gigawatt, like we got to add 30 gigawatt per year. But if you look at the overall manufacturing capacity as of today, so module stands only at around 13 to 15 gigawatt manufacturing capacity in India. And cell number, it's a very small number. It's only around 3 to 4 gigawatt available capacity as of today. And polysilicon and wafer segments, we do not have any capacity in India. So there is a huge gap in the demand and the supply from India actually. But that's the reason now the government has introduced a lot of policy reforms actually to boost the domestic manufacturing. And with all the PLI bid submissions, the capacity, the module manufacturing capacity, it's forecasted to reach more than 40 gigawatt in another couple of years time frame actually, which is well ahead of the target what we need actually, the demand what we need, which we need 30, but we will be having actually 40 gigawatt capacity by that time actually, once we realize all the manufacturing capacity. So that's the scale like currently we have been thinking about, and at the same time the cell manufacturing also will grow up. Then companies like other companies, big companies, they are setting up the polysilicon plant, ingot and the wafer plant in India. So at least a decent complete supply chain system will be available in India in the near future actually. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Sujoy, you want to add something in terms of manufacturing in India, especially given you're going to have a plant up here in Chennai soon?
I think it's going to be a hard journey for Indian manufacturing to become cost competitive, right? Right now, there is certain policy interventions which have created a distortion in the market, right? These interventions will eventually go away at some point in time. You can't build a business thinking the government's going to continuously keep a 40% BCD in place, right? Eventually, then the consumers will start reacting, saying, "Oh, you're increasing the price to equalize at the BCD level, and so the cost of energy goes up," right? All of us still have to work towards how do you make solar energy more competitive, which means that yes, there is a protection right now in the market, which is a reaction to the fact that the Chinese have been rampantly dumping their products, right? If what Milind showed 16 rupees was the cash cost, you add another 3 cents. How could people, and I know companies where their procurement team took a call that the module price is going to be at 16 cents to get to that 244 tariff, right? So clearly there is dumping going on. There were promises made. I'm not getting into all that, but the point is for any manufacturing competitiveness to happen, the ecosystem has to get built, right? solar manufacturing is a variable cost game and not so much a fixed cost game. Yes, there is a fixed cost, but because of technology changes, the fixed cost depreciates very fast, right? So two things in my view. One is the component ecosystem has to get built in India, right? Glass, backsheets, polyolefins, frames, junction box, cord plate, all of that plethora for solar, pretty much similar to wind, for example, where you're looking at blades, gearboxes, towers, all of that has to get built and get built at a scale where it becomes cost competitive, right? That's and that journey is not going to be easy because, for that journey to happen, the main OEMs have to come in first, develop that local ecosystem. It's pretty much similar to the journey the auto industry took. To me, that journey is going to take some time. It's not going to be instant flip of a switch, oh, I get a PLI and so I can produce competitively. The second, the challenge which we have is there's absolutely nothing around in the country around expertise on the capital equipment side, right? For advanced module manufacturing, right? Deposition equipment, laser equipments, right? We need to create that capacity and capability within the country. Otherwise, you'll always be beholden to Europe or to the countries where the primary R&D is going on for the next wave of technology, right? And again, that's a journey which will require time, which will require some commitment from the industries in terms of taking some risk on their capital to invest in that building that capability, right? Till these two things don't align, we are making baby steps in manufacturing. We will get to a price point where on an unsubsidized basis, we can be competitive with China. Nobody knows what's the cost in China, right? Except probably the Chinese Communist Party. So, whoever makes guesses about what's the cost in China completely removes the impact of subsidies. You can never find out where do they subsidize, what do they subsidize. And so I'm saying on an unsubsidized basis, everything remains equal. Manufacturing of solar modules or wind in India is pretty competitive. As compared to we manufacture in Vietnam, Malaysia, and the US and India. And we can very confidently say that our costs in India are pretty much at parity with a Vietnam, right? Or a Malaysia, for example. There are some pluses and minuses, but broadly the costs roll out. We don't do anything in China, so we don't understand that whole subsidy infrastructure in China. But I think the ecosystem and the technology, the capital equipment, that whole supply chain has to be created, and that's going to take some time. Till that time, we cannot be true Atmanirbhar.
Right. I think hit it on the nail there. And just in the interest of time, I'll have to jump in to the last couple of questions for this panel. But just want to hear the guests' thoughts here on policy recommendations. Everyone here has sort of alluded to that being a very essential component of the increased adoption of renewable capacity. But if we could just start with Bhaskar Pandey, if you'd want to sort of recommend or suggest a few policies that you feel like are required for the increased adoption of RE.
I think the first comes is the money, the finance part. Actually, the financing part has to be flexible enough to finance the projects. That one has to be captured. Then in all the solar tenders, the price variations, that factor has to be considered in the solar tenders actually. So that one seems to be missing because it's a very the price seems to be very volatile in the market actually. So there has to be a class for the price variation in all the solar tenders, and the reverse action on the solar price has to be cancelled, which is stop no, but that's a good one. So these are the things that immediately comes up in my mind.
Sure. Sivaramakrishnan, you want to add a couple of quick thoughts?
Okay. Yeah. I think one of the major reform undertaken by the ministry this year is the restructuring of the RPO trajectory. The major constituent hitherto was the solar component, and there was a non-solar component. This entire total structure is changed, but fortunately the storage, ESO, the energy storage is added, welcome that sign. But looking into the main RPO trajectory for next 10 years, there is no distinct solar obligation. I think that is a step backwards. I think the solar manufacturers should protest on that, not an implementing agency. I think once that is done, the interest on solar will come back. I say you have to force that interest. On one side, the tariffs have gone, energy costs have also gone, but no way now. If this is also gone, see, for example, a state like Kerala, where we have enough of hydro, I can meet all this RPO from hydro. Then why should the state utility who is a nodal agency, run any further solar programs in my state? There are many states like that. Or some states are good at wind also. In fact, there is a trajectory for wind now. So the other RPO means he can even borrow energy from the wind sector or solar sector. So this really kills the solar sector. I think that's the point.
Point well noted, sir. Ramakrishnan, you want to add a few thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at RE power to be integrated into the grid, today we are talking about large-scale energy storage, and we have seen the tenders of SECI for a gigawatt hour of energy storage, the largest tender in the world for one single site at this Fatehgarh 3 substation in Rajasthan. Or the NTPC, which has come out with their tender for 3 gigawatt hours of storage at grid scale level. Now, for these kind of projects to happen, so that the storage and the related industry, like in the case of solar, where we had this solar mission and kind of things, mission mode, we went in and we started and scaled up our solar operations, the projects, the manufacturing facilities, everything. Same way for the storage to happen, we also need to see that there are some kind of a policy advocacy and some kind of shifts. I mean, ISA and team have been doing that at the government level in a big way. And I think Rahul will also be talking about a little more about the dichotomy in the duty structure. I mean, let us look at it. This is a reality today. That when you bring in the lithium cells for applications like EVs and other things, which is also a focus area for the government and which I think you people are going to discuss that tomorrow or day after. In that, you have a very low duty structure, whereas when you are bringing in the BSS or the cells for the BSS as a package, we are paying almost 20% plus surcharge and other things and 18% GST, all put together 40% of the basic cost. Say if you are able to bring $200 per kilowatt hour is the cost of your BSS, by the time it comes over here, you are adding 40% of it. So it becomes $300 per kilowatt hour just because of the duties and taxes of it. So unless for the initial some duration, if there is some kind of a leeway provided by the government, calling it as notified projects, especially the first few demonstration projects of grid scale in India, especially by SECIs, NTPCs and others, I mean those kind of large agencies, implementing agencies, then it can help to improve upon this particular industry. And soon, I mean everybody knows that once it gets into the market mode, immediately, yes, then scaling up happens and then the economies of scale start coming in. And like what Mr. Milind was saying, that the costs will start coming down. I mean, we'll get into the cost curve and other kind of things subsequent to it. So that is something which we need to look at. I mean, that is something which I would like to say here.
Sure, thank you. Sujoy, Milind, any quick words before we close?
I think a lot of policy around RE adoption, it's all been great. One, feedback is the government should actually not over-engineer regulations and get into technical standards and, very micro things which kind of distort. At an overarching level, the policy direction has been pretty great. I think from a renewable energy perspective, the discoms have to be bought in. They're the largest consumers. And right now they seem to be on a collision course with buying more renewable power, right? Simply because the power gets generated at a time when they don't need it and they have to also back down their own captive generation. So it's a double whammy. And there should be a fix to that, right? Which means that you got to look at how do you redesign your capacity auctions? How do you convert the discussion from capacity to energy? Once we do that, once we put in things like time of use, there could be different market structures which come in, which then adopt, increase the adoption of renewables. Otherwise, we're going to hit a plateau very soon.
Absolutely.
Let me answer this at a strategic level. Today we cannot play Chinese game and win. The most important government policy, which is, you need to switch it off, okay. Important government policy today is essentially to create a protection against modules actually coming from China. That is actually something as plainly as I can actually put it. I think BCD is extremely actually important from that point of view. Obviously, we can argue about actually tactical details, how much it should be, what other policies are required. These are all important. But at a very strategic level, and this was discussed here, for Indian industry to be competitive, it needs time. And it is a balancing act because then with the BCD, et cetera, obviously cost of modules for the installation is going to go up. But we are really talking actually about, a period of 5 to 10 years. Because it is extremely actually difficult to achieve the same economies of scale China has achieved. And when you look at economies of scale in the silicon value chain, it is much smaller in terms of gigawatts. But when you talk about actually all the auxiliaries, diamond wires, glass, all the equipment actually supplies, aluminum, you will have to support. And second thing is that one has to remember, bitter reality of rule of 4. When any sector becomes extremely mature, typically actually 4 to 5 companies have the maximum market share, right? And for us to be competitive with Chinese, you cannot have actually 5 gigawatts, 10 gigawatts, even 15 to 20 gigawatts are not going to actually make any Indian company competitive at the global scale without subsidies. The scale we are talking about is north of 50. If you look at announcements in China, Longis and other companies already have close to 100 gigawatt capacity. Polysilicon capacity that is being added is in terms of actually 100, 150 gigawatts. World is actually moving very fast. It is a moving goalpost. So government policy should also actually focus on helping actually build these actually scales among fewer companies, while actually they continue to build ecosystem and actually help bigger as well as smaller players. But the reality of capital market is that in the end, actually, there is going to be consolidation. There are going to be around 4 to 5 players. Okay, scale is extremely important.
Thank you for sharing those. The audience includes industry, academia, and students. And I'd like to close out the panel by asking our esteemed guests if there was one problem statement or challenge that you'd like to throw open here, and maybe if some of the members here are listening and they could work on some of this, what would be the one problem statement that each of you would like to throw open in terms of what is missing in renewable energy generation today and how we can further accelerate the scale deployment of RE in the country?
You want me to start?
Yeah. Anyway.
I'm very sure other panelists are going to touch upon the details. I want to address once again actually what I mentioned before. The cultural actually change that is required for Indian industry to actually succeed globally. I think it is also going to actually take some time. We are not ready to be globally competitive from cultural point of view, period. Even the biggest companies in India cannot be competitive over some period of time because there is always actually this, I will license and implement mentality. So cultural actually change is absolutely required for strategic sustainability over a long period of time. Skill sets are not available in India today. And all these companies are actually looking for actually same people. I'll just give you the number. If you look at closer auxiliary ecosystem in manufacturing, for 20 gigawatt line, you need to hire around 18,000 people. 18,000 people. So if we're talking about actually building hundreds of gigawatts of capacity, we are actually talking about building actually small country, right? So there is
Quickly,
actually
we're running out of time. Just if you can
Okay.
summarize in one line so that we can cover the full panel.
culture, industrial culture of actually R&D leading to manufacturing in a short period of time.
Thank you. Sujoy.
I think Professor Junjunwala has given that challenge. If IIT Madras can get industrial power with a combination of chilling, storage, renewables at 7.5 rupees, I'm stretching the goalpost a bit, sir. Maybe 6.5. There are enough takers for it, including us, on a much larger scale, right next door to you.
The kind of challenge which the industry is looking for is cheaper cost of electricity with a greener footprint and a reliable electricity which is available. So these three things combined together, in our parlance, what we call as smart power generation. I think more of it you can see it in our website. Now, this is something at the cheapest of cost and best of the carbon footprints, or the lowest of the carbon footprints. What can be done to do that? What kind of energy mix and what kind of storage mix or what kind of alternate mixes can be brought in? Research from the fundamental level with respect to, Professor has already touched upon the different kinds of battery technologies which are being looked at from the market. Now, some fundamental research to see how the existing efficiency of the existing storage solutions can be improved upon, costs can be brought down, or the cyclic life can be brought up. And another application area could be something, how exactly a conventional, old-fashioned, traditional lead-acid battery can support what all kind of applications, especially when we talk about rooftops and those kind of residential applications, not so critical applications, and places where electricity costs have been higher. Conventional, traditional lead-acid battery can actually support in many cases, and it can work out and give a decent solution. And we know that, yes, recyclability of lead has always been there. So solutions to that effect, which can actually support the common man. Some things on that direction can definitely be thought of.
While submitting our nationally determining contributions to meet the 1.5C challenge, India has put a rider over there. It said, we will achieve all this, but we want technological and financial collaboration from the developed countries. There is a sentence in that. I think that is our challenge. We should not resort any support from them. I think that is one question I wanted to put it to the industry.
Very well said, sir. Finally, with Bhaskar Pandyan, if you'd like to leave the audience with one thought as a problem statement.
Yes, yeah. I think if you consider the overall RE mix actually, maybe in the future, the solar and the energy storage is going to dominate in the complete mix. And further to happen, definitely we need to have the enough manufacturing capacities in India. And further to happen, we need definitely the scale, economics of scale. We have to build multi-gigawatt manufacturing complexes, and also we need the technology. For technology, that covers all other factors like your talent pool, resources, all those things actually. So the scale in technology is going to be very critical for the sector growth. And that's all.
Great. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll have to close the panel. And I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists here for joining us today. Please join me in giving a big round of applause. I hope we had more time, but I hoped it was a very engaging discussion. Thank you very much.